Before every major disaster, the planet sends out a warning. A twisting wall cloud under a storm means a tornado is on its way. The smell of sulfur in the air can mean a volcano's waking up, and when the deep-sea oarfish start rising to the surface, something big is coming. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 warnings from nature you should never ignore. But before we get started, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Trust me, you're gonna want to find your way back here. Alright, on to the list. 25. Snakes and earthquakes. In 373 BCE, snakes suddenly fled the Greek city of Hestie, and days later, an earthquake and tsunami wiped it off the map. The same thing happened in 1975 in Haicheng, China. Snakes came out of their frozen burrows in the middle of winter and tried to make their way across the snow. The city evacuated, and when a 7.3 earthquake hit, thousands of lives were saved. Chinese scientists now take that kind of behavior seriously. In fact, at the Nanning Earthquake Research Center, cameras monitor snake farms around the clock. Researchers say that snakes can pick up the tiniest ground vibrations, chemical shifts, and even underground temperature changes from more than 70 miles away, sometimes days before a quake hits. Of course, there are skeptics, and yes, it is smart to trust the instruments too, but if the snakes start fleeing en masse, that is your signal to leave. 24. Earthquake lights. When the massive 8.1 earthquake hit Mexico in 2017, videos showed blue-green flashes lighting up the sky, and suddenly, everybody was talking about it. Scientists have been arguing about earthquake lights for years. Some believe they're real and caused by stress in certain rocks releasing electric charges into the atmosphere. Others say they're just regular lighting, power surges, or camera glare caught at the right moment. A few studies have looked into it though. One analyzed more than 60 reported cases dating back to the 1600s and found that most of the sightings happened near active rift zones or faults packed with quartz and basalt, which might behave like natural batteries under pressure. Still, only about 1% of earthquakes ever produce visible light, so it's rare enough that every new sighting keeps the debate alive. 23. Receding ocean water. Before the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, many people were unaware that this was a sign of an impending disaster. This rapid retreat, known as a tsunami drawback, happens when the trough of a massive wave arrives before the crest. It's been documented time and time again. During the Lisbon earthquake of 1755, and again in 1960 along Chile's coast, when the sea emptied from the bay just before one of the strongest tsunamis ever recorded, and again in Japan in 2011. In 2004, a 10-year-old named Tilly Smith actually recognized the sign from a school lesson and shouted for everyone to run. Because of her, about 100 people on that beach survived. 22. Sharks heading to deeper water. In 2001, before Hurricane Gabrielle hit Florida, a group of tagged black-tipped sharks suddenly left the shallow coast and headed for deeper water. The pattern showed up again in 2017 when Irma moved in. Researchers at Florida Atlantic University saw every tagged shark, from nurse sharks to bull sharks, head offshore well before the storm made landfall. Sharks can sense pressure changes through special sensors along their bodies, picking up drops long before we feel a shift in the air. So much so that even aquariums have noticed their sharks and rays acting strangely just before big weather rolls in. Naturally, the idea of using that kind of behavior as a kind of storm alert has come up before. It wouldn't replace satellites, but if a large number of tagged sharks suddenly vacate a particular coastal region, it could reaffirm that a storm's path or pressure is affecting that region's waters. 21. Wall clouds and funnel clouds. A dangerous storm usually gives itself away. If you're in tornado country, you'll sometimes see a piece of the cloud base sag lower than the rest, dark and heavy, and it just hangs there. That's what storm chasers call a wall cloud. It's not the tornado itself, but it's where one is likely to start. I should also mention that not all wall clouds produce tornadoes. Rotation is key. The funnel's more famous, but it's just the next stage. The storm focusing all that energy into one spot. So most storm spotters are trained to watch for that moment when the cloud rotation speeds up. Once it does, the warning goes out. 20. Cracks and leaning trees. Some locals saw the warning signs before 43 people were lost in also Washington in a landslide. The hillsides were splitting, trees were leaning, and yet most people living in the area didn't connect the dots. If you see any changes in the ground, it's moving. It doesn't matter if it's fence posts starting to zigzag or if a well suddenly stops working. What's even stranger is that you might also hear it. One of the places in the world living in the shadow of that kind of danger is Akernes, a small village in Norway. The mountain above it has been groaning for years because of a crack that's growing by almost 3.5 inches every year. It's now over 200 feet deep. When it finally gives way, millions of tons of rock will crash into the fjord below. Data shows that the wave it sends out could reach more than 300 feet high, swallowing the lower villages and ports along the water, including parts of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Landslides, and rock slides for that matter, move with unbelievable power, and once they start, there's usually not much time left to get out of the way. In the Philippines in 2005, surviving villagers near Ginsaogon told authorities they heard popping branches and distant rumbling. Minutes later, their town was gone. 19. Sudden changes in rivers and streams. If you ever see a river drop fast for no reason, something upstream is blocking the flow. And when that natural dam bursts, the flood that follows can wipe out everything in its path. In Taiwan, they've already started building systems that watch river levels in real time. One strange dip in the pattern can set off alarms that a landslide dam is forming. Japan took it a step further and included sensors that listen for the sound of rocks tumbling, a dead giveaway that a debris flood is building. There's also a bit of indigenous knowledge that we should sometimes consider. Some African communities actually move their crops uphill when they see ants building their mounds above the usual line. And if you ever notice a river suddenly go quiet, that is your cue to climb, not to film. 18. The Whumpf. I know, it's not very descriptive, but it's the best way that I can actually describe that sound. In the mountains, that deep, hollow whoomph sound under the snow means a weak layer has just collapsed, and that can trigger an avalanche without warning. Ski patrols know it, guides know it, and avalanche instructors even use it in training to show how fast things can go wrong. If patrol hears it during morning checks, they'll actually shut down the run, and guides out in the backcountry will change the route immediately. The pros who handle control work listen for it too. A whoomph tells them exactly where the snow's unstable, so they'll drop explosives there and release it safely before it breaks on its own. 17. When the birds start nesting higher. In the Amazon, people take note if the weaver birds start weaving their nests above the normal flood line. Researchers in Brazil's Pantanal watch storks' nests and move livestock if they go high. The same thing happens in parts of East Africa, where villagers take high nesting as a quiet warning to plant crops farther from the banks. When the nests are higher, the floods usually are too. It's gotten so reliable that some flood committees now include it in their reports, and it's even made its way into official flood warnings. 16. The Bulge before the blast. In the weeks before Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, the north side swelled so fast that survey markers moved more than 5 feet in a single day. That bulge told scientists exactly what was coming. Locally, those living in a volcano might see the changes with the naked eye too. A field that used to be flat suddenly slopes, or cracks appear where there weren't any before. All of those things are tiny clues that signal that pressure is building and the clock is ticking. Today we've got tools like GPS stations, laser tilt meters, and satellite radar all standing by to pick up even the smallest shift on the side of a volcano. 15. A halo around the sun or moon. There's an old saying that goes, "Ring around the moon, bad weather soon." Now, strangely enough, it's got some science to it. When you see a glowing halo around the sun or moon, you're looking at light bending through tiny ice crystals in the high, thin cirrus clouds. Those clouds don't bring rain themselves, but they often show up a day or two before a storm system moves in. The same effect can happen around the sun, too. though you definitely shouldn't stare up to check. In both cases, the atmosphere is basically telling you a low-pressure system's on the way. 14. Toads leaving their ponds. Just before dawn in April 2009, a pond in central Italy lost nearly all its male toads. When researchers later reviewed their nightly counts, they found that 96% of them had left the scene. 5 days later, a magnitude 6.3 earthquake hit, and you can already see where this is going. After the quake and its aftershocks, the toads started trickling back. The scientists didn't want to jump to any conclusions, so they began eliminating every possible factor. Moon cycles, weather shifts, even breeding timing couldn't explain the mass exodus. There have been other reports from China showing similar behavior, but the case in Italy stands out because it's one of the few that was closely monitored before, during, and after the event. 13. Gas emissions and the smell of sulfur. Volcano scientists pay close attention to what they smell, because when the air starts reeking of sulfur, it usually means magma is rising. Gas measurements are one of the best clues a volcano gives off. At Mount Pinatubo, sensors caught sulfur dioxide emissions skyrocketing from a few hundred tons a day to over 5,000 right before the 1991 eruption. Then the readings suddenly dropped, a sign that the vent had clogged. Pressure built, and the mountain blew. The same story is played out from Hawaii to Italy to California, where carbon dioxide leaking from Mammoth Mountain soil was strong enough to kill an entire forest. Every active volcano under surveillance now has instruments tracking sulfur and carbon gases in real time, so the public is usually alerted if there are any signs of change. 12. Groundwater and gas anomalies. Sometimes the first sign that something underground is changing doesn't come from the ground itself, but from the water. In Iceland, wells have shown chemical shifts in hydrogen and sodium just days before nearby quakes. And in China, before the 1976 Tangshan earthquake, wells that had held steady for years suddenly began acting erratically. Some dropped overnight, others surged back up for no reason at all. As rock layers strain and shift, they can squeeze underground reservoirs, forcing water and trapped gases to move in unpredictable ways. That's why research stations now keep a close watch on radon gas and groundwater chemistry. In Japan, sensors buried deep in boreholes have caught sudden spikes in radon before major quakes. Taiwan, China, and India are monitoring groundwater too. The data isn't reliable enough to predict anything yet, but these readings could one day become part of an early warning system. 11. Birds fleeing far ahead of storms. Just like birds seem to know when an unusual flood season's about to start, they've also been known to clear out before a really ugly storm. I mean, watch any disaster movie and the birds are usually the first to know something's up. And for once, Hollywood got that part right. In 2014, researchers tracking golden-winged warblers in Tennessee noticed that the birds suddenly abandoned their breeding grounds and flew nearly 1,000 miles south. The weather was calm, the skies were clear, and the storms that would later unleash 80 tornadoes were still hundreds of miles away. Yet, the warblers took off days before the first funnel clouds appeared. Birds seem to pick up on infrasound, those ultra-low vibrations produced by massive storm systems. It's the same deep rumble elephants can sense before distant thunder. And now that scientists are watching more closely, they're seeing the same thing happen for hurricanes and typhoons too. 10. When volcanoes suddenly have rising temperatures, or steam. You can tell a lot about a volcano by how it starts to sweat. Before El Salvador's Santa Ana blew in 2005, the crater lake suddenly went from calm to steamy and bubbly. The same thing happens in other places too. On New Zealand's Ruapehu, the lake's temperature sometimes shoots up to 60 degrees before it bursts. Even the snow on Colombia's Nevado del Ruiz once began melting in strange, uneven patches before the mountain came apart. When magma moves, it heats everything above it. Water, gas, rock, you name it. And that pressure has to go somewhere. 9. Restless bees. I've covered sharks, birds, and toads, but maybe we should go a bit smaller. A lot of people run screaming when they see a bee. Yeah, I know you do, or you do that crazy hand-waving thing that only makes them madder. Anyway, if you do ever get the chance to watch a beehive up close, just know this. They are as in tune with nature as anything I have talked about today. Beekeepers have long noticed that hives go quiet before a storm, sometimes hours before the first dark cloud rolls in. Some have even reported bees abandoning the hive entirely before earthquakes, only to return after the shaking stops. Scientists think they're reacting to shifts in air pressure or the faint vibrations that most of us never feel, and new research projects like We4B are actually now using smart sensors inside hives to track those reactions. 8. Deep-sea fish appearances. You don't see oarfish often. They live far below the surface, deep in the ocean's twilight zone. Still, every few years, a few of them turn up. Before the 2011 earthquake, more than a dozen washed ashore. So it's easy to see why, in old folklore, they were called the messengers from the sea dragon's palace. Science hasn't confirmed a link between their appearance and things like tsunamis yet, but I don't really think you need science for this one. When any animal that lives 1,000 feet below suddenly shows up at your feet, something has changed. 7. High winds and waves. Long before a hurricane makes landfall, the waves start stacking higher and hitting harder. For instance, when Hurricane Irma rolled through the Caribbean in 2017, the swells it pushed ahead of it started hammering Florida's east coast several days before the storm arrived. NOAA teams later measured the wave surges and discovered that they added nearly a foot to coastal water levels before the storm surge even hit. Waves during Irma also created currents that moved across the reef and shelf regions, which pushed water inland beyond what the models predicted. They eroded the beaches, weakened the dunes, and set up the coastline for even worse flooding when Irma finally arrived. By the time they added up homes, boats, and lost businesses, the damage sat somewhere around $60 to $80 billion. 6. Dying or distressed vegetation. Most people expect volcano warnings to come with smoke, rumbling, or lava, but sometimes the first signs show up in the plants. On Mammoth Mountain in California, that warning came in the form of dying trees. In 1989 and 1990, people noticed the pines around Horseshoe Lake turning yellow and dying off for no apparent reason. When scientists tested the ground, they found carbon dioxide leaking from the soil at levels as high as 90% in some places. It was enough to choke the roots and kill the forest from underneath. That dead zone eventually spread to around 170 acres. A similar thing happened in Cameroon before the very well-known Lake Nyos disaster in 1986. Farmers saw their crops browning and small animals dying near the lake. Sadly, at the time, nobody knew that it was a sign of carbon dioxide building up until the eruption came. And by then, it was too late. 5. Foreshocks. I know a lot of you have never experienced an earthquake. Neither have I. We don't get them in Florida. But in some parts of the world, they're as common as afternoon rain. People get used to the small ones, but every so often, they're a sign that a bigger one's coming. Figuring out which ones are foreshocks is tough, because small quakes happen all the time. Still, scientists look for patterns, a rise in frequency, clusters in the same area, or tremors creeping along a fault line. When those little quakes start speeding up and staying local, that's when geologists start paying attention. Think of it like pressure bouncing back and forth underground. Each small break shifts stress to nearby spots, which crack in turn, until the whole system finally lets go. 4. Insects. Something else that's now being studied scientifically is changes in insect populations, specifically before a drought. The idea is that plants under moisture stress release more chemicals or produce more flowers, which attract these insects. Another explanation is that dry conditions cut down predator numbers, giving pests a short-term boost. Some studies even suggest that stressed plants release volatile compounds that herbivorous insects pick up on, but using that as a forecast signal is still more theory than proof. 3. Red skies. You've probably heard the old saying, red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. Well, that one, just like the ring around the moon, holds some truth, at least in certain parts of the world. Around sunrise and sunset, the sun's light has to travel through more of the atmosphere, scattering away the blue and leaving those deep reds and oranges. When you see a red sky in the morning, it usually means there's a lot of moisture already in the air, and since weather systems in mid-latitude regions tend to move from west to east, that moisture could be part of an oncoming storm. A red sky at night, on the other hand, means the weather to the west is clearing, and the sunlight is bouncing off clouds that are already moving away. 2. Green skies. If red skies are more of a gentle warning, well, green skies are the exact opposite. They mean trouble's already here. NOAA scientists say the strange green color of clouds before storms is caused by massive thunderclouds holding huge amounts of water and ice high up in the atmosphere. The sunlight passing through all that moisture gets moved about and reflected in such a way that it leaves a greenish tint. So, in all likelihood, you're going to get some hail. It's not a guarantee of a tornado if you live in that part of the world, but it's a strong clue that hail is nearby. And when there's hail, the storm is strong enough to spin one up. 1. The calm before the storm. When a thunderstorm builds, warm, moist air gets sucked into the clouds, creating strong updrafts. Right before the storm hits, those updrafts can momentarily suppress surface winds, making everything go still. If you've ever experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Even the wildlife reacts. Researchers with NOAA's Vortex SE program have found that in tornado-prone parts of the southeast, this quiet can come just minutes before a storm touches down. Because many of those tornadoes form at night and in hilly forested terrain that hides them from radar, that brief stillness may be one of the few natural cues people get. It's basically the point where the storm structure is tightening. You'll get it right before severe winds or rotation begin. And that's a wrap. If you're not quite ready to get off YouTube just yet, well, get comfortable and watch our related video, 25 Bizarre Events That Defy All Logic. It's a list of real, verified events that make you question most of what you used to believe was possible. I think you'll love it. That link will show up about right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you again soon. Stay safe.